On behalf of the National Book Foundation, it gives me great pleasure to present the Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters to my dear friend, the second love of my life, Gore Vidal. Video.
I don't acknowledge anybody since. Wisely, I think. And I do remember, as a kid, watching him make his entrances and exits from rooms and halls and parliaments. And he was always in a wheelchair. And I thought, well, the poor man, you know, he can't frolic and play like the rest of us. And then as I entered the artificial limb years, I began to be highly sympathetic to this gallant president. And there's a story he loved telling about himself and his debility. And he'd just come to the White House, and he was not very mechanically minded, and he locked his wheelchair. This is the nightmare of all of us. World War doesn't bother most presidents, but you know, that does. To find yourself locked in the cabinet room when you want to be in the Oval Office. Yes, Mr. Roosevelt, we're going to let you out in a minute. And he was, the first day in the White House, he couldn't make the thing work. You know, the wheels weren't turning around. And he was trapped, and there was nobody there. And he called for help, and help did not come. And he, finally, he yelled, and somebody came to rescue him. And mind you, he'd only been in the White House about one day. And there he was, locked in his chair. And so he said, well, next door was the Navy Department in the old executive building. And he said, you know, he was a Navy man, always to the end of his life. He said, get me somebody from the Navy to look after this thing. He was a good user of expletives, too. He was a terrifying man. His head was this big, and it went that way, too. So, I mean, you never knew which side you had it coming at you. And so there he was, waiting to be rescued. And they got a kid from the Navy Department who started to push his chair in front of them across the cabinet room. And the kid didn't know where he was going. So the president is beginning to vanish in one room after another in the White House. And finally, the kid panics, and the chair runs away. And there is the president racing across 2 rooms by then. And the boy is suddenly inspired. He sees an open door in front of him, which doesn't look too dangerous. He aims for the door, which proves to be supplies to keep a great empire going, you know. In those days, it was carbon paper, largely. And suddenly the president is parked with all this carbon paper, still trying to get out, and nobody coming to his rescue. And finally he said, you know, in that glorious voice, most presidents fear assassination. It is my impression that I shall vanish from your view because I have been filed. Well, as another president might have said. I noted that I flew in on Continental Airlines from Los Angeles, and luckily the pilots were not playing games. That's about as scary a story as I've ever heard, you know. But then it said something 75 years ago, and I started to count in my head. Well, what was I doing 75 years ago? Well, I was flying to Los Angeles. And from New York. And I thought, well, you know, the world has changed a great deal since those days. And I did not fear being filed, but I feared some of the movies that I might be forced to observe as I too entered the carbon paper cabinet, which Mr. Roosevelt was, in his jolly way, was quite contented to serve a little time in. Then one starts to think about all the changes, particularly in, let's say, book publishing, a subject which has come up tonight. And nowadays, it seems that the progress of literature is really, first you print the book, and then you pulp it. And it saves such a lot of time. And it's, you know, it's fun for everybody. Everybody can dance around the fire and be delighted that we live in such a glorious era. Where's Bill Buckley tonight? Bill? Bill? You can come out now. Usually I let him out at midnight, but what fun, what fun it all was. Anyway, it was a great pleasure to be here, to see Joanne beaming and looking marvelous. We have now known each other, I don't know, 50, 60 years? 50 years, yes. Well, I couldn't tell.